What is a witch? So many people talk about, they use it as a scare factor. To me, there's just so many different ways to describe a witch that it's not a scare factor unless it's just some evil, demonic person, which there probably are some like that out there. But I'm going to tell you exactly, what a witch is. In old European languages, witch originally referred to a seer, knower, and wise woman. And it's also related to the Proto-Germanic root Wicca, which connects wise and wisdom. They put it together for witch. Historically, wise women were often healers in the communities, linking the term witch to wisdom. So it's not this scary type thing that comes at you now. Because most of us, including me, was raised in church. I always heard about the Witch of Endor, and so I've studied a lot into her on why she was evil, why she was considered evil. So, why the Witch of Endor was called a witch? In the Bible, in the biblical account of 1 Samuel 28:3-25, the woman at Endor is described as an ov. That's the Hebrew word for it. Or, I can't pronounce the Greek word, but it's engastrum mythos, something like that for the Greek term. And it's that in the ancient Near Eastern context meant a medium or necromancer, someone who could communicate with the dead. The Hebrew word ov or av is thought to refer to a ritual pit or place from which spirits were summoned, and such figures were condemned in Israel's law. In short, if the witch, healer of light, is using God's gift in obedience to him, it is not evil. But if it involves witchcraft or occult practices, it is contrary to biblical teaching. That's summoning the dead for doing your bidding, doing something evil to people. And that's not good in anything, if you're going to want to do something evil to people. Now, let's talk about King Solomon. He is often associated with sorcery and magic, particularly in later texts and traditions. But the biblical account primarily portrays him as a wise ruler rather than a sorcerer. Solomon's reputation in historical context for the biblical portrayal in the Hebrew Bible. Solomon is celebrated for his wisdom, wealth, and construction of the temple in Jerusalem. He is depicted as a man of great insight and understanding, granted wisdom by God. However, the biblical texts do not explicitly describe him as a sorcerer or magician. Later texts and legends do, though. The notion that Solomon as a sorcerer largely stems from later writings, particularly the Testament of Solomon, a text that emerged between 1st and 5th centuries CE. This text portrays Solomon as having the ability to command demons and spirits, often using a magical ring to do so. Such depictions contributed to the development of a magical reputation that was not present in original biblical accounts. Solomonic magic, various grimoires such as the Lesser Key of Solomon and the Greater Key of Solomon detail rituals and magical practices attributed to him. These texts promise ancient wisdom and elaborate rituals for commanding demons, which further solidified his image as a sorcerer in the eyes of later cultures. The cultural impact. The transformation of Solomon's image from a wise king to a powerful magician reflects broader cultural exchanges, particularly during the Hellenistic period when Jewish and Greek magical traditions began to intertwine. This synthesis led to the incorporation of Solomon's name in various magical practices and spells, enhancing his reputation as a sorcerer. In summary, while Solomon is not depicted as a sorcerer in the biblical text, later traditions and magical writings have attributed him to various supernatural abilities, leading to his enduring legacy as a figure of magic and sorcery in folklore and occult practices. Now, King Solomon's worship of other gods was due to the influence of foreign wives, leading him to turn away from the exclusive worship of the Lord God of Israel. The context of Solomon's idolatry. In biblical account, particularly 1 Kings 11, it is noted that Solomon loved many foreign women, including those from nations that God had warned the Israelites against intermarrying with. These relationships ultimately led him to worship other gods. Specifically, the text states that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and he was not fully devoted to the Lord as his father David had been. Specific deities that Solomon worshipped. Solomon followed several foreign deities, including Astarte, the goddess of the Sidonians, Milcom, the detestable idol of the Ammonites, and Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab. He even built high places for these gods, allowing his wives to burn incense and offer sacrifices, which was considered a significant departure from his early devotion to God. And God became angry. This was the consequence of his actions with Solomon for his idolatry. Not adultery, but idolatry. And it represented a breach of the covenant that required exclusive devotion to him. As a result, God declared that he would tear the kingdom away from Solomon's lineage, although this would not happen during Solomon's lifetime due to the promise that he had made to David. So that wisdom, in all actuality, that I see it, when Solomon asked for wisdom, he was given all the wisdom. He was given the wisdom of the heavens. He was given the wisdom, physical and spiritual wisdom. Is how I've always seen that. Now, the belief that witches are inherently evil is largely in conception rooted in historical culture and religious context, rather than accurate representation of witchcraft. The historical context. The perception of witches as evil beings has deep historical roots, primarily influenced by religious propaganda and societal fears. During the European witch hunts, many individuals, particularly women, were accused of witchcraft and labeled as evil due to their practices, which often included herbalism and folk magic. These accusations were frequently based on scapegoating during the time of crisis, such as crop failures or disease outbreaks. Because, like now, it was like then. Everybody's looking for someone to blame, other than what's right in front of their eyes, really. So they got a bad rep for that. Now, misconceptions about witchcraft. Association with Satanism. The idea that witchcraft is inherently satanic stems from historical events and religious persecution. Many early Christians viewed witchcraft as a threat to their beliefs, leading to the demonization of those who practiced it. Diverse practices. Witchcraft encompasses a wide range of practices and beliefs, many of which focus on healing, nature, and personal empowerment. For instance, modern witches often emphasize self-improvement and positive intentions rather than harm. And cultural perspectives. In various cultures, practitioners of witchcraft were often respected as healers and wise individuals. The shift in perception to viewing witches as evil is tied to the spread of Christianity and the subsequent vilification of pagan practices. The reality of witchcraft today is many practitioners of witchcraft identify as witches and engage in practices that promote healing, spirituality, and connection with nature. The notion that all witches are evil is a stereotype that fails to recognize the diversity and positive aspects of witchcraft. Most witches do not seek to harm others and often work towards bettering themselves and their communities. In conclusion, while the belief that witches are evil has historical significance, it is essential to understand the broader context and recognize that witchcraft is a multifaceted practice that can embody both light and dark aspects, depending on the intention of the practitioner. And believe me, I've seen people that want to do bad, but I've seen people that want to do everything good. And that the ones that do bad or harm to others, even if they're doing it for someone else, they end up getting an evil spirit attached to them, and they lose any gift that they ever had, and they just end up being wicked. I've seen people like that. But the majority, 99% of those that practice the healing and being of the light are not like that at all. Now, Wicca is a religion of witchcraft. The Wicca religion started in the early 20th century, but not all witchcraft. Most witches are not Wiccan. I don't claim to be a witch. I claim to be a wise woman, and I am not a Wiccan. To me, that's just not my thing. It's an early religion, or, later religion that wasn't formed by somebody that I actually respect. So I'm going to tell you about it. The Wicca religion started in the early 20th century. Its formal founding generally attributed to the 1950s in England. Gerald Gardner was his name, often referred to as the father of modern Wicca, played a pivotal role in introducing the religion to the public. Wicca emerged as a distinct religion rooted in ancient pagan traditions and gained significant attention during the mid-20th century. Now, public image and controversies. Gardner's insistence that Wicca was not his invention, but a discovered ancient cult, allowed him to present himself as a humble messenger rather than a founder. This narrative, while strategic, has been criticized by some as muddying historical clarity. His personal life was also scrutinized. He was accused of being egocentric and even sex-obsessed by his rival Charles Cardell. And these slurs were amplified by journalists and some Wiccans. Some biographers note his odd upbringing, lack of formal schooling, and tendency to blur the fact and fiction in his writings. Charles Cardell was an English Wiccan and founder of the Old Tradition. Charles Cardell was born in England, and he died in 1977. He was an English Wiccan priest who developed his own distinct tradition of witchcraft, known as Old Tradition, separate from Gerald Gardner's Wicca. So the thing of it is, just like with any religion, I mean, there's thousands upon thousands of religions. Wicca is the same way. You know, you got to have branches here and branches there because they all don't agree on the same thing. It's always been that way. Now, I wanted to, another thing I want to point out, this book about the Appalachians and the root doctors. The preachers in Appalachians were root doctors. You know, people would go to them and they would get whatever they might need for either healing or protection, getting money, you know. And there were also people that were not preachers that were root doctors. But the church would talk about the people that were not preachers and say they were witches. So this book tells all about that. This book is Doctoring the Devil, Notebooks on Appalachian Conjure Man, and it's by Jake Richards. He does a lot of good Appalachian books. And this one, the Complete Book of North American Folk Magic, tells about the witches of Salem. It tells about all kinds of stuff. And was there witchcraft in Salem? This is on page 35. This one is by Corey Thomas Hutchison. Very few people grew up in North America without at least hearing about the Salem witch trials from February 1692 until late spring of 1693. 14 women, 5 men, and at least 2 dogs were all executed on charges of witchcraft, with more than 150 investigations. Now, without reading you this whole page, I'm going to skip to the names. Elizabeth Morse practiced version of cunning craft and performed healing charms for her neighbors. Samuel Wardwell operated a sort of psychic, predicting things like future lovers and children, and was reportedly fairly accurate. He once told a woman she'd bear 5 daughters and then a son, which it happened. And then Dorcas Hoar, H-O-A-R, of Beverly, Massachusetts, was arrested several times in the decade prior to the famous trials for owning books of fortune-telling and divination. Rebecca Johnson and her daughter used a method known as cosmomancy, divination by means of a sieve and shears, to find out if her son was still alive. Sarah Cole of Lynn, Massachusetts, noted that she and her friends used a method known as the Venus glass, which involved breaking an egg into a glass of water. You know, and then divination to divine the identities of future husbands. This is very similar to contemporary sleepover fortune-telling games. And it goes on. But what I'm saying is, it was such a minute thing. None of these people did anything wicked. What can you do back in the 1600s to entertain yourself? You know, when I'd have slumber parties, my mom always read our fortunes and stuff, and she was a very strict Christian. So, I mean, it was just something. These people ended up dying for that, which was wrong. And there's a lot more to the witch trials than meets the eye, but we won't get into that now. What I want to say mostly is, if you say you're a witch, okay, you're a witch. Don't do it as a scare factor. People see old B horror movies and, old horror movies. None of those movies make any sense. I've never seen one depict witches as they're supposed to be. They're always making them evil or anything like that. Anything that they can to get your attention so you'll watch the movie. If you're getting your information from movies, then stop. You need to, start studying and knowing what you're actually talking about. But, that's the thing. A witch is not bad 99% of the time. And those that are lose whatever gifts that they might have had in the first place. And that is it for our What Are Witches Really?